And we're going to pop right in this morning to talking about our first project for this class. And our first project is the Design Principles project, and it's going to play through, which I don't want it to do. So let's just give me a minute here. That should solve our problem, I think. So the sheet that you have in front of you is the sheet that I will hand out with every project. Like I said, it's also available on Blackboard, so you can always go there if you leave it at school or need it. But what we're going to do for this first project is take a look at just the basic design principles. So for hopefully many of you, this is a review, but because this is also a Gen Ed art class, it's important to note that some people in our class don't have the same base knowledge. So we're going to go through all of these things this morning. I'm going to ask you to craft your own definitions. So if you look at the sheet that I just gave you, I made like a really quick mark with a pen that's like a circle with a star next to all of these items that are bolded. And in addition to that, you'll see asymmetrical, symmetrical, and radial. So as we go through these pieces this morning, we'll talk about them in terms of the principle sets that are guiding them, right? Just because you're showing a principle set doesn't mean it's the only one you're using, right? So if this is an example of rhythm and repetition, is it also an example of some other principle set that you know of? Or if you look at that list on the sheet, it's asymmetrical, absolutely.
Positive and negative space.
Positive and negative space. So the idea being that what this artist is trying to put as the top item on the agenda is rhythm and repetition. So we have rhythm that's described as the effect of recurring or repetitious lines, colors, forms, etc. We have repetition, which is the use of a similar object, line, or color scheme over and over in the same way. Now, we're not going to use color at all for this project. In fact, I do not want you to even use grayscale unless you're implying grayscale with some sort of pattern in black and white, be it lines, dots, anything. And I'll show you some examples of that as we go through. But what I will ask you to do is to really own each of these design principles and to come up with solutions that illustrate them. So let's look at a couple of other examples. Now, some of the examples that I put in here are really strong compositions and some are not as strong, right? So these are 3 examples of rhythm and repetition. So of these 3 examples of rhythm and repetition, which do you think is the least successful composition? The middle one. Why? Who said that? Me. Faith. Just say it. Don't be afraid.
It's not the same. Like, it's...
I don't know how to explain it. The only thing that really looks like they're repeating is the circle.
Yeah.
Okay. So they're definitely repeating, but they're not getting to the rhythm piece of it because it doesn't continue. And when we think about rhythm, we think of something that our mind can sort of digest as happening over and over again. Think of a piece of music, right? So if they were to add another circle, maybe even another circle with the dot motif, and that broke the edge of the page on the bottom, it would be a much more successful composition, right? Now, the one on the left certainly has rhythm and repetition. Agree? Yeah? Is that asymmetrical, symmetrical, or radial, that design on the left? Radial and symmetrical, absolutely. Right? So if we fold it in half, we get the same thing on either side. But the base of it is a radial composition, right? So for each of the 3 things that you draw, you're going to draw 5 thumbnails of ideas to use, right? And one of them I want you to really focus on using radial. One of them I want you to really focus on using an asymmetrical solution. And one of them I want you to work on using a symmetrical solution. So in this case, for rhythm and repetition, the artist on the left, these are all student works, the artist on the left chose to use Radial as their solution, came up with 5 solutions of Radial, and this was the strongest solution that they then rendered in Illustrator. Does that make sense? Now you'll also note that the one on the right, it certainly shows rhythm and repetition, but it's also a great example of what?
Symmetry.
Symmetry.
Oh,
Yes, even better. Positive and negative space. The second principle set that I want you to look at is contrast and elaboration. So very simply, contrast can be defined as the use of opposing elements, such as colors, forms, or lines, in proximity to produce an intensified effect. Does this design do that? Does it show you contrast? Yeah, what's the contrast? Shout it out.
Kind of in like the line weight and the shape.
Awesome. So you've got sort of line weight and shape and pattern happening in the foreground in those little wheels. They're like little gears. And then in the background, they use positive and negative space and some bigger black areas to create a contrast within the composition. All right? Some other examples of contrast and elaboration, as well as, I don't know why the one on the right is showing up as gray to you up there. If you look on my screen, it's black. So I'm not entirely sure. So the background on the left-hand side is black. And then the lines that are used in the pyramid and in the shape underneath it, so solid lines and then broken lines, create the impression of grayscale. And this is a fine thing to use for this assignment, if you want to get that sort of grayscale feel in it. It's much more impactful when the black is there, but could this design be changed to be even more successful to show us contrast and elaboration? What if in the pyramid, on the right-hand side of the pyramid, I used thicker lines, created a darker gray? Would it create more contrast? Sure. But it's pretty successful the way it is, right? By changing up line weights, we can create more contrast and elaboration. Now, the important thing to realize about elaboration, hopefully you're all noticing, Liz, you have the same image on the right-hand side that you just showed us for the last one. What's up with that? Right? But it also is a good example of contrast and elaboration for that same reason, right? It uses line weight. It also uses contrast of shape, right? The contrast of round, soft shapes and very pointed, triangular shapes. I don't want you to recreate the wheel in the designs that you're making. Working with really basic shape sets is very important a lot of times to getting our point across. Now, the one in the middle is an excellent, excellent example of elaboration. But it struggles a little bit with contrast because it's missing something that is very important to a successful composition. Anyone want to take a stab?
Focal point.
Yes. How could you make a better focal point here?
Put something towards the center, something bigger than the rest. All of the shapes are like the same size. There's not really one that sticks out more than the rest.
Okay, so the one thing I want you to move a little bit away from, because a real easy way to get a focal point is to put it in the middle, right? But look at that upper left-hand corner. There's the white square with the little circle. It's actually more of a rectangle, right? With a little black circle in it. Imagine if I just doubled the size of that and left it kind of right where it was, but balanced. That would create a focal point, right? Through the use of contrast and elaboration. And then our third one, positive and negative space. This is also referred to as figure ground. We can use those terms interchangeably. And this is the principle that uses the balance of space which is filled and that which is empty to achieve a desired effect. I love to ask people, what's filled and what's empty in this composition?
think the white is filled.
Okay, why do you say that?
I don't know, because it kind of looks more three-dimensional off of the page rather than the black.
Okay. So that is a direct success of positive and negative space, right? So you've got what we would refer to as black inked areas. Those are the filled areas, right? When we print it out, the black is what prints on the page. The white is just the page. There's nothing there. But because of their successful use of figure ground here, we actually see two circles, one inside the other, on a background just by shifting the way that those lines exist. The other really important thing to me that I would like you to put like a big note, maybe even in all caps, scream it to yourself in your notes, is that really strong positive and negative space doesn't need lines to define form, right? If we look at this, we don't need circles, we don't need a stroke around those circles to tell that they're circles. And I would say that that's the thing that people kind of get caught up in. And so I'm going to show you two examples here of positive and negative space that also lead me to another suggestion that I have as you move through this. So all of your designs are going to hold a space that is 3 inches by 3 inches, a perfect square. What that means is that when you thumbnail, you either thumbnail at exactly 3 inches by 3 inches. I'd recommend that. But if you're a person who likes to work teeny tiny, as long as you work in a perfect square, that's fine too. But by drawing 3 inch by 3 inch squares to do your thumbnails and to do your inks, you are actually addressing composition. When you willy-nilly scribble down a rectangle on your sheet, you're not really addressing composition because we can't force a rectangle into a square composition. All right? Are all my non-art majors sticking with me? Do they have any questions so far? Am I keeping it level enough? All right, good. So the example on the left, it's really weird. Everything, maybe it's just me. Is it just me that sees that as gray because I'm over here?
No, it's gray.
Okay. Depending on the angle you're at, it looks more gray, I think. These are both black and white also. So these both take up that 3 by 3 space. The one on the left very naturally suggests that there's something on the top right, especially when we put it into a composition that are 3 squares, which we'll see in a minute. The one on the right is starting to do it really well, but it's suffering from something. Actually, kind of suffering from 2 things. There are 2 slight adjustments that we could make in this that would hold the space better and make it a more compelling composition. Anyone want to take a stab? So how many of you know the word proximity, if I use that word?
Yeah.
Pretty much everybody? So proximity, how close something is to another thing, how close something is to the edge of the 3 by 3 square. So if we look at this example here, and we look at this, the proximity is pretty good, but if we had moved it over just slightly more, it would be more compelling because it would look less like somebody took a little snip off the end and more like it really was existing off the plane as well, right? And if we took the oval in the bottom right-hand corner and we broke the page with that, then we would have sort of bookends, top left and bottom right, that would help to balance the composition. So some of your composition happens just within that square, but some of it happens by anchoring other objects and balancing that anchoring, maybe with 2 items, possibly with 3 items, right? To kind of get that whole composition working. So what's the assignment? Your goal is to create an informative piece which illustrates 3 design principles while providing the accompanying terms and definitions for the audience. The terms to be illustrated are rhythm and repetition, contrast and elaboration, and positive and negative space. Prior to beginning work on this assignment, you will need to look up the definitions for the given principles. In your sketchbook or in your notebook, when you come to class with your sketches, I am asking you to have with you the definition for rhythm and repetition, the definition for contrast and elaboration, and the definition for positive and negative space crafted in your voice. okay? So you can use a dictionary, you can look them up online, you can use the video and the PDF that I post in Blackboard, but I want you to, in your voice, rewrite those 3 definitions. I also want you to be very clear. You're going to do 15 thumbnail sketches, all right? You're going to create 3 3x3 designs in the end, 1 for each of the given principles. You'll start this out by creating 5 thumbnail sketches. So let's make an example. I'm doing rhythm and repetition. I'm going to use a radial design. And I'm then going to write radial at the top of my page and do 5 explorations of what my radial solution could be. Is that clear? Right? I want you to try to avoid really recognizable things. For instance, I don't want to see you like draw a cat, but if you want to have cat-like shapes as a part of your theme, as long as it's stylized enough, that's fine. You will bring those 15 thumbnail sketches with you to class on Tuesday, and I will sit down with each of you individually after I get you started with setting up your working space, all right? You also will have an opportunity once your workspace is set up on Tuesday to begin working on your inks here in class. So I would encourage you to bring your drawing pens with you to class that day so that you can work on doing those. We will then select 3, and here's the really important thing. As you're doing the set of sketches, I want you to think of this as a body of work, as these are 3 pieces that go together in a set, right? So we're going to have 3 separate designs that are your designs that work cohesively as a set that show us asymmetry, symmetry, and radial compositions, and that illustrate positive and negative space, contrast and elaboration, and rhythm and repetition. So at the very end, you can see I'm pretty serious about the no grayscale, right? At the very end, so the first week or so of this project, we will work just on illustrating those designs, all right? And then you will then paste those designs onto their own layers and incorporate the definition in order to create an informative and aesthetically pleasing piece of design work in black and white only. So here are some student examples. I'd like to start out with this. So one of the things that's going to be very important as we move through this, even if you already know Illustrator, what we are going to get those of you who know Illustrator to do is to work in Illustrator in a very competent, unsloppy way so that the things that you're building aren't overly cumbersome, but just beautiful and easy to edit, all right? Here's a great example of looking at an InDesign piece in outline mode when it's built right. You'll notice that nothing falls outside of that 3x3 square. Even where there aren't lines on the left around those items fill that space. So this is it once it has color attached to it. So the artist decided that they did need linear elements left and right to really balance it within the composition, but they didn't really need them on the outside, top and bottom, right? So we have radial on the left. Kind of started getting its symmetry in the middle, but not quite there, right? And then asymmetrical on the right. But I keep this in here, and one of the reasons is it's a great example of the cleanness of typography, which we'll talk about later, because the second step at about week 2, we will look at how do we select typography, how do we use hierarchy of type, how do we use the choice of typeface to best accentuate our artwork, as well as how do we make choices that give the viewer the best chance of reading and understanding what we're trying to show them. That's the informative piece. So some other examples. Those of you who are like, oh my God, this is crazy. What is going on here? I can't believe I took this course. You can do something as simple as this. Just using circles, you can illustrate what's going on, right? You don't have to make it hugely complex. And when you're doing thumbnails, if your circles aren't perfect, that's okay, right? Thumbnails are just a suggestion of what we're trying to get at. In this case, the person kind of worked through circles, squares, bringing it all together and adding little triangles, right? So they kind of told the story visually from left to right. This piece, I love to show people because this student was a horticulture student. And Anne took my class, and this was her first assignment. It's gorgeous, right? And she went on to get a graphic design degree because she found that she really loved what she was doing. She also she does one thing that we'll talk about later that's terrible, but I keep it in here because I forgave her for it. But those little words at the end of each of the definitions, those are called orphans, and we don't allow that, right? No child will be left dangling in this classroom, and those little individual words are dangles. But she's got hierarchy, she's chosen a typeface that accentuates her designs. Some of you are going to get a little bit more creative. I'm going to give you a base layout. So if you just drop everything in and do your type, you'll have a grid structure that I give you to work with, and you can work that way. Some people want to push it a little bit further and do something different, and that's totally fine, as long as you have a balanced composition and you include all of the information. Here's a set that uses a bit more of a thematic approach. Again, I do not know why those are turning out gray down there. That whole field in the bottom is actually black, so you don't see any of those circles. It does tell me that when this person rendered it, they just threw a bunch of circles on there, and now it's reading that way. But this is a great example of using sort of an underlying other concept, right? The idea of space, right? Space is used in each of these compositions. The artist is showing us a sense of space in order to make it a cohesive set. Another example. Another example here. Another example here. So at the end, you will submit a printed copy, which will include your 3 designs along with the accompanying principle and its definition. And you must also include, in an aesthetically pleasing way, your name, Art 115, and Fall 2019. So if we look back here, if you can see it in the bottom, Jennifer did it really understated as a footer, Art 115, Jennifer Williams, Fall 2016. Cameron Nagler, Fall 2016, Art 115. The other thing I will ask you to do is to pick your strongest design and render it in color, right? So once we flush this out, we put together our layout, we're going to take one design and we're going to render it in color. When you walk into the space every day, you see something that says create up on the wall. That's all from this project in this class last semester. So the students all did their best designs. We pulled them together to make that installation piece, and Amy printed the letters to say create. And if you notice the one in the middle, that's Fran's. If any of you who knew Fran, he was a lab tech last semester. That's Fran's, and he was like super like, I can't believe you didn't put a letter on mine. I'm like, Fran, yours makes the most beautiful A. We don't even need anything else. It just creates an A. So take a look at that if you haven't noticed it before. You'll also be expected to turn in a project folder. I will walk you through this process. So starting next class, we'll talk about working on a Mac. We'll talk about naming files and file organization and folder organization. I will give you a roadmap of what a strong file and project folder looks like, and you'll turn in the work in that way. So hopefully y'all stayed with me through that whole thing. What questions do you have for me about what I just showed you? I'm going to show you some examples of thumbnails here in a moment. Nothing? I was clear? Because my kids tell me all the time I don't make any sense. Yeah.
Okay, so for now we just have to do the 5 thumbnails that you said? Is that
Yeah, so 15 total. You're doing 5 for each of the principal sets. So you'll have one set of 5 that's for, say, rhythm and repetition and radial. You'll have 5 that are exploring positive and negative space and asymmetrical. And you'll have 5 that are contrast and elaboration and symmetrical. Though you can pair those up however you choose.
okay?
Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. What else? Okay, so let me pull up an example here. And I just pulled them all into one. So let's see if I can grab it quick. Here we go. So these are just some examples of thumbnails that I've gotten over the years. Thumbnails can, for me personally, I like to do thumbnails in pencil, but some people like to do them in ink. I tend to be a pencil it, then ink a little bit over it to show what I'm trying to get at. Whether you use pencil or ink doesn't matter to me. That you make little compositions that anyone can understand as your intention is what I want you to make. I also want you to make with your hands what you see in your mind. Do not, anytime that little voice, we're going to call them the committee. Anytime the committee in your brain says, oh, that's way too hard to do on a computer, or oh, that's way too hard to do in Illustrator, oh, you're going to go, bye-bye, committee. I'm going to see this thing, and I'm going to trust Liz to help me make this thing, right? I'm going to trust myself to do the work and be brave and make this thing. That committee shouldn't be there, and that's why between now and Tuesday, I want you really just working pen to paper, all right? That was a 4th one that they did. Some more examples. Here are some lighter examples. This is a great example. The reason I put this one in here is that it really shows us what their intention is and talks about it. So when you meet with me, I don't want you to come up here and be like, I think that one, no. I want you to say and show me on your page, this is positive, negative space. This is asymmetric, right? Even if as you're exploring it, you do an asymmetric, a symmetric, I want you to really be able to tell me, what are you trying to show us if I can't grab it real fast, all right? We'll also go through next class scanning these in to have them for yourself. But another example here of just some quick thumbnails. Quick thumbnails. And you'll notice that everybody approaches it a little bit of a different way. All right? Questions about thumbnails. So they're quick, you're moving through them, you're not really getting caught up in the details, and if you do more than 5, awesome. But all I'm asking you to do is to at least explore 5 different ways of looking at a topic. Yes?
Can they have words in them or not?
I would prefer for this assignment that they don't, unless you can give me a really compelling reason why they need to. So many of these examples are from the project for 215. And so like this example here, Barbara Kruger, if you're familiar with her work is all about using words. This is literally like her signature. She uses these red boxes with white words. So there really aren't good ways to describe her without this. And that's why this person incorporated words into it. If you came to me with an idea that was like, I want to do all of my designs based on the letter I don't know, I'm just making stuff up, right?
Yeah.
That would be fine.
Okay.
What I really want you to focus on, though, is just the purity of the design and not necessarily a message within. What else? Yeah.
I don't really have a question. I have to leave.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Dentist appointment.
Okay, yep. Do your thing. Just make sure you have those sketches for next class, okay?
Thanks.
Yep. All right, anything else about this? All right, so we've got a pretty decent amount of time this morning to begin on those thumbnail sketches and kind of working those ideas out. Also for you to log into your computers and use use the computer to look up your terms and definitions, or maybe get inspired by some black and white artwork. What I really want you to do is just really dive into this project and really think about how you're going to show us and how you're going to show a viewer eventually what are these design principles. All right.